Imagine if you could overlook the entire Eurasian landmass like a deity in the mid-2nd century BC, you would witness an incredibly magnificent yet deeply fractured tapestry of civilizations. In the east, the city of Chang'an on the horizon is fading into the deep twilight. The lights of the Weiyang Palace are not as brilliant as in later generations. They even appear somewhat stingy, for the master of this empire, Emperor Wen of Han, Liu Heng, is renowned for his extreme frugality. From 180 BC to 141 BC, this is an era revered by later Chinese historians as the rule of Wen and Jing, the Pax Sinica of Wen and Jing. This was not only the formative period of the Han Empire, but also the first officially recognized golden age in Chinese history. During this golden era of roughly 40 years, the Han Empire controlled about 3.8 million square kilometers of land, and its population rapidly surged from 14 million in the early Han period to approximately 35 million. In the same period, the Roman Republic covered an area of about 1.4 million square kilometers with a population of roughly 14 million. According to Chinese historical records, the copper coins in the capital, Chang'an, piled up for so long that the strings binding them rotted away, leaving countless coins scattered on the ground. The grain in the great granary, Taikang, accumulated year after year, overflowing from the doors and rotting in the open air until it became inedible. Now, let us look in the other directions of the world. In the Mediterranean sphere, the Roman Republic, like a starving behemoth, was frantically devouring the legacy left by Alexander the Great. In 168 BC, the Roman legions utterly extinguished the glory of Macedonia at the Battle of Pydna. In that same year, the Roman ambassador Gaius Popilius Laenas single-handedly intercepted the Seleucid king Antiochus IV, who was attempting to conquer Alexandria. Without mobilizing a single soldier, this ambassador merely used a walking stick to draw a circle around the king in the sand, arrogantly commanding him to provide an answer for troop withdrawal before stepping out of the circle. This was the reality of the West at that time. The will of Rome had transcended sovereignty, becoming a terrifying universal law. In 146 BC, during the final year of Emperor Jing of Han's reign, Carthage was entirely pulverized, Corinth was reduced to ruins, and Rome was formally crowned as the absolute overlord of the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, at the center of the world, the Parthian Empire, Arsacid Dynasty, on the Iranian plateau, led by Mithridates I, was plundering territory from the declining Seleucid Empire, extending its power into Mesopotamia. In India, the splendor of the Mauryan Empire was a thing of the past. The usurping Shunga Empire was engaging in a bloody clash and cultural hybridization in the Indus Valley with the Hellenistic kings who had crossed the Hindu Kush, such as Menander I, who was fascinated by Buddhist philosophy. This golden age was not a period of global tranquility. While the Han Empire was resting and recovering, other civilizations around the world were standing at the crossroads of expansion, collapse, and restructuring. This video will lead everyone through the mist of 2 millennia, examining this first pinnacle of Chinese history through a comparative lens. This is a grand counterpoint of growth and expansion, of precipitation and eruption. Let us begin our journey from the Han capital of Chang'an, crossing the surging Mediterranean Sea, the war-torn Iranian plateau, or the turbulent Indus Valley, to witness that magnificent, volatile world of rising warlords and shifting powers just as China unlocked its first golden age. In 180 BC, when Emperor Wen of Han Liu Heng, supported by veteran officials like Zhou Bo and Chen Ping, entered Chang'an from the Principality of Dai to officially ascend the throne, He faced an empire that had just survived the bloody baptism of the Liu clan disturbance, the purge of Empress Liu's clan, and was in a state of prolonged economic shock. At this time, the city walls of Chang'an were not yet fully constructed, and the palaces appeared dilapidated and desolate. In the early years of his reign, Emperor Wen issued a highly symbolic edict, abolishing the crime of slander and monstrous talk, laws on heresy and defamation. He personally wore coarse silk garments and straw sandals, signaling to the realm that the empire would enter a restrained period of restoration. In 167 BC, Emperor Wen took an extremely bold step in the history of human finance. He ordered the total abolition of the national agrarian tax. This policy lasted for 12 years until 156 BC, after Emperor Jing of Han took the throne, when it was restored to a fixed 1/30th tax, a 3.3% flat agricultural tax. While the Han Empire silently healed its wounds, other corners of the Eurasian continent were experiencing a domino effect of radical upheavals. In 188 BC, the geopolitical landscape of the Western world was permanently altered by a single treaty. The Seleucid Empire suffered a disastrous defeat in its war with Rome and was forced to sign the Treaty of Apamea, relinquishing its territories in Asia Minor and paying massive reparations. This marked the irreversible decline of West Asian hegemony. In 185 BC, a tremendous military coup convulsed the Mauryan Empire on the Indian subcontinent. The commander-in-chief, Pushyamitra Shunga, assassinated the last sovereign, Brihadratha, during a military parade. This established the Shunga Empire and ended 137 years of Mauryan rule. Shortly thereafter, in 180 BC, right when Emperor Wen of Han officially ascended the throne, the Greco-Bactrian king Demetrius I crossed the Hindu Kush to invade northern India, inaugurating the 2-century-long reign of the Indo-Greek kingdom. In 175 BC, the eccentric and aggressively ambitious Antiochus IV seized the throne of the Seleucid Empire, attempting to salvage its declining fortunes through hardline Hellenization policies and foreign wars. The year 168 BC brought several crucial turning points for the world. In the west, the Roman legions defeated the Kingdom of Macedonia at the Battle of Pydna, terminating the rule of the Antigonid dynasty and marking Rome's official emergence as the hegemon of the Eastern Mediterranean. That same year, at the critical moment when Antiochus IV was on the verge of capturing Alexandria in Egypt, he encountered the Roman ambassador Gaius Popilius Laenas. The ambassador drew a circle in the sand and, in the name of the Roman Senate, humiliated and forced the retreat of this imperious monarch in plain view of everyone. When this dramatic scene unfolded, Emperor Wen of Han in Chang'an was implementing various legal reforms and benevolent policies to alleviate the burdens on his people. In 154 BC, the Han Empire experienced the most violent internal labor pains of its golden age, the rebellion of the Seven Princes. 7 vassal kings of the Imperial Liu clan, led by Liu Pi, the king of Wu, rebelled in protest against Emperor Jing's policy of reducing their territories. This crisis was swiftly crushed in just 3 months by the brilliant general Zhou Yafu. The result was that the Han government successfully centralized local power, completing a profound integration of its administrative system. Simultaneously, the storm clouds of war gathered thicker over the Mediterranean. In 149 BC, Rome launched the Third Punic War. The year 146 BC was of paramount importance to the history of Western civilization. The Roman army completely razed the city of Carthage to the ground and, in the same year, destroyed Corinth in Greece. This meant that in the eyes of the West, Rome was now utterly invincible. When the timeline reached 141 BC, Emperor Jing of Han passed away in the Weiyang Palace, and his son Liu Che, Emperor Wu, ascended the throne. By this time, the Han Empire's population had rebounded from the initial 10 million to nearly 40 million. The grain in the state treasuries overflowed the storehouses, and civilian livestock roamed the wilderness. At the other end of the world, Mithridates I of the Parthian Empire captured Seleucia, the core city of Mesopotamia, in 141 BC, signaling Parthia's replacement of the Seleucids as the new overlord of West Asia. Thus, the superpowers at both ends of the Eurasian continent, the Han Empire and the Roman Republic, as well as Parthia in the middle, had all completed their most critical restructuring of power. The Han Empire had achieved its restoration through dormancy, while the rest of the world was reforged in the fires of war and the shadows of swords. Let us examine and scrutinize this Chinese Golden Age from various angles. First, from the perspective of the political system. When Emperor Wen of Han Liu Heng stepped into the Weiyang Palace, he inherited the highly centralized administrative skeleton left by the Qin dynasty. But, at this moment, the empire desperately needed warmer blood. Over the subsequent 40 years, the Han Empire completed a profoundly impactful experiment, enveloping the cold, calculating, legalist bureaucratic machinery within the temperate Huanglao philosophy of Wu-wei, non-action. Unlike the hereditary peerages of the pre-Qin era, the Han government during the reigns of Wen and Jing began to broadly implement a professional bureaucratic system based on salaries and meritocratic evaluations. This was an epoch-making paradigm shift. The exercise of power no longer relied merely on aristocratic bloodlines, but rather through the selection mechanism of the virtuous and upright. Xianliang Fangjeng, opened its doors to the professionally trained literati class. However, this attempt at centralization encountered its greatest challenge in 154 BC. At that time, the fault lines buried deep within the empire ruptured. Liu Pi, the king of Wu, allied with 6 other vassal kingdoms of the Imperial Liu clan, including Chu and Zhao, and launched a massive rebellion under the banner of cleansing the emperor's entourage, historically known as the Rebellion of the Seven Princes. Relying on the sheer genius of the illustrious general Zhou Yafu, the central government severed the rebel army's supply lines in a mere 3 months, quelling this turmoil that nearly upended the empire. This military victory was not simply the extinguishing of the flames of war, it was a watershed moment in Chinese administrative history. Through the subsequent policy of curtailing the vassal states, the Han government successfully clawed back the administrative, judicial and taxation powers originally dispersed among the kingdoms, consolidating them within the central authority. From then on, the commandery and county system replaced the enfeoffment system as the ironclad law of the empire, and a political order entirely vertically managed from Chang'an was formally established. While the Han Empire fortified its foundation of grand unification through a bureaucratic system, the Roman Republic on the other end of the continent was operating under an entirely different political logic. Rome possessed no standing bureaucracy. Its core of power was the Senate, an elite club composed of 300 traditional aristocrats, great landowners, and former high-ranking magistrates. Contemporaneous with the rule of Wen and Jing, Rome's political bonds were fragile and highly personal. Every morning in the city of Rome, a unique ritual known as the Salutatio unfolded. Flocks of plebeians would gather at the doors of senior senators' mansions, offering their respects in exchange for legal protection or material handouts. This governance model, predicated on the patron-client system, highly concentrated power in the hands of a few patrician families rather than neutral governmental functions. In 140 BC, right at the tail end of Emperor Jing's reign, the systemic flaws of the Roman Republic began to erupt en masse. As wealth and slaves from overseas conquests flooded in like a deluge, the traditional Roman class of smallholding farmers went bankrupt in droves. Their lands were annexed by the Senate's power brokers, forging a massive urban proletariat. The consul at the time, Gaius Laelius, astutely foresaw the crisis and submitted a land redistribution draft to the Senate, attempting to save the collapsing smallholder economy through state intervention. Yet, this highly rational reform proposal was ruthlessly vetoed under the collective siege of elite interests. The rigidity of this political system stood in stark contrast to the Han Empire's ability to rapidly recalibrate social contradictions through central directives after suppressing the rebellion of the Seven Princes. The uniqueness of the rule of Wen and Jing is further embodied in a humanistic compassion exceedingly rare within autocratic regimes. In 167 BC, Emperor Wen ordered the formal abolition of corporal mutilation, commuting physical disfigurement such as amputation of the nose and facial tattooing to penal labor or flogging. This reform originated from a deeply moving tale of a young girl named Tiying who pleaded for her condemned father. Its essence reflected the Han Empire's rediscovery of the value of human resources. Rather than permanently maiming a laborer, it was far better to let him create wealth for society. Meanwhile, Emperor Wen himself pushed restraint to its absolute limits. Records state that he halted the construction of a dew terrace because it would cost the equivalent of the assets of 10 middle-class households. During his 23-year reign, he never expanded his palaces, gardens, or wardrobes. His dying edict even forbade excessive mourning, prohibited the placement of gold and silver in his tomb, and mandated the use of plain earthenware for burial goods. As the Son of Heaven possessing all within the four seas, he fundamentally rejected the premise that consuming the realm's wealth for private luxury was a matter of course. By comparison, in the Hellenistic world of the West, the monarchy was sliding into the delirium of deification. In the Seleucid Empire, the contemporaneous monarch Antiochus IV styled himself as Epiphanes, God manifest. He zealously poured public finances into the construction of monumental temples and extravagant, triumphal processions, attempting to sustain his faltering rule by projecting supernatural might. In the Ptolemaic Dynasty of Egypt, court governance devolved into a meticulous harvesting of taxes along the Nile. The bureaucrats primarily served the pharaoh's private coffers rather than the livelihood of the populace. The model of frugal governance and moral cohesion established by the Han Empire during the Wen and Jing periods not only stood entirely alone in its era, but also shaped the deep underlying logic of East Asian politics for the next 2 millennia. This was the very first embryonic form of what would later be known as East Asia's civil service bureaucracy. The economic history of the 2nd century BC for human civilization as a whole is essentially a tale of divergent experiments on how an empire extracts taxes to maintain its operation. Within the Weiyang Palace of Chang'an, Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing opted to test the tenets of later laissez-faire economics through a subtraction of state power almost unheard of in human history. To resurrect the nation from the ashes of the late Qin dynasty, the Han Empire established a governance paradigm known as agriculture as the foundation. Coupled with a small government and a reduced fiscal deficit, the state proactively shackled its own desires, anchoring the fulcrum of wealth back into the soil. In 167 BC, Emperor Wen issued an edict announcing the complete exemption of the national agrarian tax. This zero tax rate policy astonishingly lasted for 12 full years. Even after Emperor Jing ascended the throne and reinstated the levy, the rate was a meager 1/30th tax, or a mere 3.3%. Under the productive forces of that era, this was effectively a state of absolute laissez-faire. The fiscal logic of the Han Empire was startlingly simple. As long as the peasantry held surplus grain in their hands, society would organically generate its own resilience. Concurrently, the fiscal logic of the Mediterranean world veered toward the opposite extreme. The prosperity of the Roman Republic was, at its core, a predatory economy predicated on the premium of war. The year 167 BC witnessed a wondrous historical coincidence between East and West. In the exact same year Emperor Wen announced the abolition of the land tax, Rome also implemented tax exemption for its Italian citizens. However, the true natures of the two were worlds apart. The Han tax exemption stemmed from governmental frugality and contraction, whereas the Roman tax exemption derived from the colossal war reparations and plundered spoils extracted during the Macedonian Wars. The fiscal skeleton of Rome was not built upon domestic output, but rather upon the brutal exploitation of its provinces in Spain, North Africa, and Greece. In these provinces, a merchant class known as the publicani, tax farmers, circled the land like vultures. They bid for tax collection rights from the Senate and then extorted the provincial subjects at rates exponentially higher than the official mandate. Research indicates that the actual fiscal pressure on Roman provinces at this time was drastically heavier than that within the Han Empire. On the banks of the Nile in Egypt, the Ptolemaic dynasty showcased a third economic model: extreme state monopoly. The pharaohs of Alexandria treated the entirety of Egypt as their private estate. They directly owned nearly half of the nation's arable land and imposed a draconian licensing system on the production and sale of grain, linen, papyrus, and even beer. Every tavern and every loom operated under the precision surveillance of the bureaucracy. While this model made the House of Ptolemy the wealthiest royal family in the contemporary world, it utterly suffocated grassroots commercial vitality. Unlike the fluid society of the Han Empire, which believed in storing wealth among the people, social mobility in Ptolemaic Egypt was intensely compressed. Massive agricultural yields were squandered on maintaining a colossal mercenary army and the opulent construction of Alexandria, rather than being converted into fixed civilian assets, as in the Han Dynasty. Yet, the Wu-wei, non-action of the Wen and Jing periods, was not entirely without hidden perils. Modern economic historians, through Gini coefficient comparisons, have unveiled a startling truth. The degree of wealth inequality during this era was actually remarkably high. In the Han Empire, the concentration of wealth was not achieved through taxation, but through long-term peacetime accumulation. Because the state did not intervene in the economy, the landlord and merchant classes, wielding a first-mover advantage, began annexing land on a massive scale. Data estimates reveal that the wealthiest 1% of the Han population controlled roughly 26% of the total income, while in Rome, this figure stood at approximately 19%. The wealth distribution of the Han Empire was not just stratified by class, but also heavily geographic. Employing the administrative strategy of strengthening the trunk and weakening the branches, the Han court forcefully funneled the nation's elite and colossal wealth toward the Guangdong region. On 6 separate occasions, the Han court compelled local magnates from across the empire, possessing assets over 3 million coins, to relocate to the Imperial mausoleum districts near Chang'an. This explosive surge in wealth birthed highly controversial, super-rich tycoons like Deng Tong. Emperor Wen, out of deep favoritism for Deng Tong, astonishingly bestowed upon him an entire copper mountain in Yandao County, Shu Commandery, and granted him the exclusive right to mint coinage. This led to a situation where the Dongtong coins, circulating in the market, outnumbered even the central government's currency. When an empire permits an individual to possess the power of currency issuance, it simultaneously exhibits its supreme confidence and laissez-faire attitude toward power, while foretelling the violent tectonic shifts occurring within its social structure. In summation, the economy of the Wen and Jing era was a great prosperity of human classical antiquity. While Rome relied on the bayonets of its legions to harvest wealth from its provinces, and Ptolemaic Egypt relied on meticulous ledgers to monopolize the very right to survive, the Han Empire chose the most resilient path possible. It temporarily returned the right of extraction to the earth, allowing society to spontaneously grow a thick layer of fat in total silence. It was precisely this layer of fat that not only shielded the nation against subsequent natural disasters, but also stockpiled nearly limitless fuel for Emperor Wu of Han's ensuing 40 years of global warfare. This was the ultimate triumph of agricultural fundamentalism over the predatory empire and the monopolistic regime. If politics and finance were the empire's mind and blood, then technology and productivity were the most robust muscles of the rule of Wen and Jing. In the global purview of the 2nd century BC, the Han Empire was undergoing a silent industrial revolution. While the Western world was still hammering wrought iron in Mediterranean workshops, the depths of the eastern lands were already echoing with the roar of molten lava from blast furnaces. This was the first time human civilization had mastered the rhythm of liquid metal on a massive scale. In the realm of metallurgy, the Han Empire of the Wen and Jing period demonstrated a generational advantage that would have left contemporary Roman artisans astounded. Han artisans inherited and vastly advanced blast furnace and cupola furnace technologies. The core of this technology lay in improving the bellows structure and using refractory materials, enabling furnace temperatures to stably surpass 1,200 degrees Celsius, completely melting iron ore into a liquid state. This meant the Han Empire could cast iron wares on a massive scale, much like pouring bronze. Archaeological excavations reveal that Han agricultural tools, cookware, and even architectural components of this era were mostly made of cheap, highly durable cast iron. In contrast, although the contemporary Roman Republic possessed exceptionally high-quality forging techniques, its smelting technology remained trapped in the bloomery stage. Roman blacksmiths had to repeatedly hammer iron blooms in a solid state to remove impurities, leaving ironwares in the West in a perpetually expensive, semi-manually customized state. The Han Empire, however, had already achieved the standardized and mass production of ironwares by the 2nd century BC. This explosion of productivity directly translated into millions of iron plows and hoes across the fields. During this period, the Han Empire also birthed a miraculous machine that changed the history of human cultivation: the seed drill, Lausch. This was an iron-made, tripod-structured seeding machine capable of simultaneously trenching, sowing, and covering the soil, ensuring the spacing of every row of crops was perfectly uniform. The efficiency of this mechanized sowing was more than 10 times that of manual planting. Concurrently, the design of Han plowshares reached the zenith of the classical era. Through scientific improvements to the curvature of the moldboard, the heavy Han plow could effortlessly turn over deep soil and completely bury weeds, drastically enhancing soil fertility. According to comparisons by agricultural historians, the plowing efficiency of 1 or 2 oxen paired with this highly efficient plow far exceeded that of the cumbersome, scratch plows lacking a turnover design used in Europe until the 18th century. It was precisely this highly precise mechanized exploitation of natural forces that allowed the China of the Wen and Jing era to sustain a vastly larger population with less human labor. In the realm of the textile industry, the Han Empire's silk technology also scaled its first peak. The treadle looms of the Wen and Jing period were already capable of managing extremely intricate warp and weft relationships. Measurements of excavated silk fabrics from this time reveal a density of up to 220 warp threads per centimeter. Such textiles, as light as the dawn and as thin as cicada wings, were practically miracles in the eyes of the ancient Romans. Although Romans of this era excelled at crafting woolen and linen goods, they were entirely ignorant of the production process of an organic fiber like silk. Some Roman authors even absurdly believed that silk was a fluff harvested from trees. While the aristocrats of Alexandria squandered fortunes for a single bolt of Han brocade, the villages of the Han Empire universally echoed with the rhythmic clatter of looms. This was the most advanced, flexible industry of the classical age. Regarding the mediums for storing and transmitting information, the Wen and Jing period also sowed the seeds that would overturn the world. While traditional historiography credits the invention of papermaking to the later Kai-Lun, modern archaeology has discovered fragments of primitive plant fiber paper in tombs from the Wen and Jing era. This implies that as early as the 2nd century BC, the Han Empire was already attempting to break free from the burdensome weight of bamboo slips and the exorbitant cost of silk cloth. In stark contrast, the contemporary Mediterranean civilizations remained heavily dependent on papyrus produced in Egypt. Although lightweight, papyrus, due to the limitations of its plant fibers, rotted easily in damp environments, and its production was entirely subjugated to the geography of the Nile River Valley. Another medium, parchment, though durable, was phenomenally expensive. Crafting a single book often required the slaughter of an entire flock of sheep. When the Han Empire, under the rule of Wen and Jing, began exploring how to convert cheap plant fibers into a lightweight writing medium, it effectively raised the curtain on the democratization of knowledge. This provided the indispensable material foundation for the colossal civil service system and academic institutions that followed. This technological vanguard was further reflected in the precise measurement of time and the systematic observation of nature. In the Chang'an of the Wen and Jing era, the clepsydra, water clock, and the sundial had already become the government's standard tools for calibrating the timing of administrative decrees. This quantified management of time was a prerequisite for maintaining the highly efficient operation of a unified empire's bureaucratic apparatus. Simultaneously, Han scientific records of astronomy and meteorology possessed far greater continuity and administrative authority than those of any other civilization in the same period. In summary, the technology and productivity of the Wen and Jing era were not merely ingenious tricks, but a systematized progression pointing directly toward an industrial revolution. By comprehensively integrating energy utilization, blast furnaces, mechanical transmission, seed drills and looms, and material innovation, early papermaking, the Han Empire forged an extraordinarily resilient civilizational paradigm. This supremacy culminated in one specific outcome. At this precise moment, the Han Empire had already completed the qualitative leap from a consumptive civilization to an accumulative civilization. While the Roman legions were still plundering physical wealth through war, the artisans of the Han Empire were silently constructing an unprecedented pinnacle of material prosperity by maximizing the output of every inch of land and the efficiency of every furnace. The ideological inclusivity and pluralism of the rule of Wen and Jing constructed a spiritual homeland for the classical age. Upon the ruins of Qin's legalism, Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing selected Huanglao Daoism as the state's core philosophy. This philosophy emphasized oneness, the unity of the cosmos and political order. Yet, at the executive level, it advocated following nature, preserving tranquility, and discarding restlessness. This forged a wondrous trans-temporal juxtaposition with Stoicism, which was rising in the Mediterranean world during the exact same period. Roman Stoics like Posidonius advocated personal conformity to natural law and inner temperance, perfectly mirroring Emperor Wen's pursuit of simplicity and non-disturbance of the people. However, while Stoicism remained largely a moral cultivation for the Roman elite, the Huanglao philosophy in the Han Dynasty evolved into a highly actionable manual for state administration. It directed the government to proactively retreat, granting society the breathing room to organically grow. The Wen and Jing period was also the critical formative era for Chinese Confucian thought and family ethics. Emperor Wen personally practiced filial piety. The tale of him tasting medicine for his ailing mother, Empress Dowager Bo, was immortalized in the 24 paragons of filial piety, becoming the core moral paradigm of subsequent Chinese civilization. This cohesion based on familial bonds, where the family and the state were inextricably linked, stood in stark contrast to the Roman Republic's contractual society founded on law, citizenship, and patron-client relationships. Through the recommendation system, Chaju, the Han Empire absorbed virtuous scholars into the government, constructing an ethicized bureaucracy. In the West, although the Library and Museum of Alexandria served as the epicenter of Hellenistic science, its academic pursuits were highly detached from the masses, serving solely the elite echelon. During this era, Han culture, through the reinterpretation of classics like the Book of Songs, Book of Documents, and the I Ching, Book of Changes, began penetrating the lower strata of society, forging a collective consciousness endowed with immense resilience and cultural assimilative power. In art and aesthetics, the Wen and Jing era unveiled a rustic yet grandiose romanticism. Han funerary art, stone reliefs and lacquerwares were replete with fluid, dynamic curves and a profound reverence for nature. This diverged sharply from the rigorous, realistic and somewhat militaristic sculptural and architectural styles of the Roman Republic. The Han people believed in a resonance between humans and nature, pursuing the unity of heaven and humanity. The Romans, conversely, were more passionate about conquering nature and altering landscapes through monumental civil engineering. This fundamental philosophical dichotomy ensured that Han China, even amidst its golden age, perpetually maintained a reverence for power and a quest for social harmony. The Roman Republic, meanwhile, continuously inflated its ambition of man conquering nature through conquest and expansion. Ultimately, the Huanglao philosophy championed by Emperors Wen and Jing bequeathed a governance DNA to Chinese civilization: an adaptable exterior, a resolute core, a velvet glove, an iron fist. This was the quest for an exquisite, dynamic equilibrium between administrative efficiency and societal freedom. In the realm of national defense, the rule of Wen and Jing was a period of preservation brimming with strategic wisdom. Facing the increasingly formidable Xiongnu nomadic empire established by Modu Chanyu in the north, the Han Empire did not rashly choose war. This was not born of incompetence but of deliberate strategic calculation. They opted for the Heqin matrimonial alliance policy, maintaining a fragile peace along the borders through tributes of silk, fine wine, grain, and imperial princesses. This was a form of defensive realism, its essence being the exchange of economic resources for precious developmental time. During this 40-year period of rest and recovery, the Han Empire forged an extraordinarily robust military reserve system. a nationwide system of universal conscription was implemented, requiring all able-bodied men of age to undergo a year of rigorous military training in their local commanderies and counties. This stockpiled a reserve force of millions of combat-ready soldiers for the empire. In terms of military technology and equipment, the Han army was undergoing a silent revolution. The Han crossbow was the most advanced long-range strike weapon in the world at that time. Its range and accuracy far surpassed the javelins, pilum, of the Roman legions, and its terrifying penetrative power was sufficient to pierce enemy heavy armor from 100 paces away. The crossbow infantry squares developed by the Han army utilized alternating fire, similar to the continuous volley fire of later line infantry, to weave an unrelenting net of firepower. This demonstrated a supreme defensive advantage against the shock charges of nomadic cavalry. By comparison, the Roman legions at this time were preoccupied with offensive warfare in the Mediterranean. The Roman army's advantage lay in its flexible maniple system, which exhibited supreme close-quarters combat capabilities in fragmented terrain. However, when the Roman legions first confronted the composite bows and hit-and-run cavalry tactics of the Parthians at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, they suffered a devastating annihilation. Yet, a full century earlier, the Han Empire had already begun constructing a massive heavy cavalry force capable of clashing head-on with nomadic warriors, driven by its extreme emphasis on state equine administration. Emperor Jing established 36 state horse-breeding pastures. This is the ultimate paradigm of a great power's strategic reserve. During the reigns of Emperors Wen and Jing, the Han Empire's national defense expenditure was consistently kept at rock bottom, allowing government coffers to maintain colossal surpluses. Yet, the martial genes of the empire had not atrophied among the populace or the grassroots government. Rather, they were concealed within the framework of universal conscription. Concurrently, the armies of the Mediterranean's Seleucid Empire and Ptolemaic Dynasty were increasingly succumbing to mercenarization. Their rulers were forced to squander vast fortunes, hiring Greek and Celtic warriors to maintain their regimes, leading to fiscal exhaustion and political fragility. When Emperor Jing passed away, he left behind a war machine that, although dwelling in peace, could instantly mobilize hundreds of thousands of elite infantry and cavalry alongside the most cutting-edge artillery-like crossbow mechanisms. It was precisely this muscle, quietly accumulated during a golden age, that sustained Emperor Wu of Han's subsequent 40-year crusade of vengeance and expedition that swept across Eurasia. When we look back at these 40 years of the rule of Wen and Jing, we discover a unique temporal window in which Chinese civilization accumulated power in low-profile obscurity and forged its character in gentle tranquility. The two successive monarchs, Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing, utilized their restraint and wisdom to anchor the very first coordinate in the developmental logic of Chinese civilization. The essence of a golden age should not merely be the boundless expansion of territory, but the abundance of civilian wealth and the absolute stability of social ethics. In this first officially authenticated golden age, the Han Empire comprehensively established its structural superiority over the contemporary world across the dimensions of political bureaucratization, economic liberalization, technological modernization, and ethical familism. This was an inward-growing energy. It did not rely on the frantic outward devouring of the Roman Republic, but rather, through the self-repair of its internal institutions, birthed a sustainable civilizational model. Simultaneously, the external world was trapped in a turbulent and fragmented transition. Rome was gestating the seeds of its own destruction amidst its victories. The Hellenistic world was disintegrating in internal friction, and Indian civilization was wandering through a loss of identity. The stability and growth of the Han Empire during the Wen and Jing period transformed it into a beacon illuminating the darkness at the eastern end of the Eurasian continent. Although this era was also shadowed by unequal wealth distribution, the hidden perils of land annexation and border conflicts, the civilizational resilience and institutional rationality it demonstrated remain a paradigm for human governance to this day. The moment Emperor Wu ascended the throne, he inherited a superpower with overflowing treasuries, cutting-edge technology, cohesive public morale, and an absolute readiness to conquer the world. This is the final footnote the rule of Wen and Jing leaves to history. The most formidable expansion often begins with the most profound accumulation.